The unemployment market and its response, which has been positive to the implementation of the National Minimum Wage Bill in November last year, according to the Minister of Employment and Labour, Thulas Nxesi. Now, Minister Nxesi said this at his first budget vote in Parliament, also mentioning that only 7% of employers nationally were not compliant. And joining us now from our Parliament studio in Cape Town is the Minister of Employment and Labour, Thulas Nxesi. Thanks so much for your time this morning, Minister.
Thank you, and good morning, Sakina, and good morning to the listeners.
Minister, let's just start by contextualizing the 7% that you talk about. So when we say that 7% of companies are not compliant, is this 7% of all employers and people employing individuals as well, like, for example, domestic workers? Is that the total complement of people employing people in South Africa, or is it a sample?
Sakina, we are still talking about a sample. We are talking about a sample because we are still waiting for a full report from the Employment, the Minimum Wage Commission, which is gathering a proper report, which is going to give us all the details of what is happening. The 7% we're talking about thus far, it's what has been submitted by the different employers, that out of the particular number, out of a particular number, 7% of those do not qualify.
So just looking at that sample, can you give us an indication of its size? How many employers are we talking about?
Well, at this stage it's very difficult because in total we're talking about 1.7 million registered employers with the UIF. At this stage, that number which we're talking about, it's not even a quarter of all the companies. So it's just a small number. It was more of a sample. But the Commission will be able to give us that information in a month's time as to what exactly are we talking about.
So then it brings us to the question, when you say, Minister, that the employment market rather has taken well to the National Minimum Wage Bill, what are you basing that statement on? On this sample?
Can you repeat that again, Sakin?
I'm saying, Minister, you've indicated that the employment market has actually taken well to the implementation of the minimum wage bill. So are you basing that on this sample?
Certainly we're basing that on the sample, Sakina. We are basing it on the sample. And we will be able to say whether our sample is correct or not. It will depend on the total figures.
And how soon can we expect that?
Well, in terms of the Commission, we are supposed to be getting that report in 2 months' time.
So looking at where things are right now and looking at the sample, are you able to give us an indication of which sectors were actually pulsed on this particular matter, or was it across sectors?
Our information is that it's across all the sectors. It's not a particular sector. So it's a mixed bag.
And with regard to your capacity to actually go wholesale in terms of monitoring the implementation and compliance with the National Minimum Wage Bill, are you in a position to ensure that your department is able to go to each and every employer and give us, valuable statistical information as a result of that?
If we're talking about, Sakina, 1.7 registered employers, clearly we won't have 1.7 inspectors. We won't even have 10% of that. But what we're going to do, we're going to depend on the goodwill of the employers to come voluntarily But some of the inspectors will be able to go. It will also depend on the unions. It's a question of cooperation between the department, the shop stewards in the factory floor, and the employers themselves. And we think that we can be able to do that. But what will never happen is for us to employ even 10% of the inspectors. We won't have them. We are going to add the inspectors, but they won't be able to go to each and every area. But the employers must know the consequences, that we will do sports checks, and once they are found that they are not complying and they have not reported, there are going to be harsh penalties.
What are those penalties, Minister? What are some of the repercussions that companies who are not compliant can look forward to?
We will leave it to the Commission, but they must understand that this might involve fines, it might involve dealing with their licenses, but we're not going to be reckless. We will have to deal with with this case by case, so that we don't destroy jobs at the same time, but and try and persuade the people to comply.
Minister, are you able to tell us, at least, give us an estimate of the percentage of companies that are simply not registered with the department?
Well, at this stage, I would not be having that information.
So,
we know for a fact that some of the small companies which are operating in the informal economy do not necessarily register. It's something which we still have to deal with.
So, knowing full well that we are now talking about a sample, before the National Minimum Wage Bill was implemented in November 2018, there was, of course, huge speculation made that this will actually spark wholesale retrenchments. Has it led to those sort of retrenchments, at least in this sample?
Well, we have not seen those retrenchments. That's why we are saying a number of those who have come forward, they seem to be complying. Others are raising a number of reasons, and we have been able to tell them that let them apply and interact with the Commission. So we have not seen the massive retrenchments which people were talking about.
And just a final question, Minister. What about the sectors like domestic workers, like farm workers? And they, of course, are not part of this determination. They still stuck with their sectoral determination at this point, but it was said that it would be phased in, the national minimum wage, in those sectors that have been left out at present. How long before we see that?
This is a matter we're also dealing with. Remember, I'm just about a month into this portfolio, and that's one of the questions which I've put. And in terms of the briefing, they've indicated that it's a matter which is one of the urgent programs which we have to implement by trying to extend this to all the workers.
Well, Minister, we thank you for your time this morning.